Good morning, beautiful people. Hope you're having a wonderful day so far. Today, I want to talk about how to escape skinny fat hell. Trust me, I was skinny fat. I have helped many people who were skinny fat become jacked, and it's a pretty easy process to do it. So the biggest problem with skinny fat, the reason why people become skinny fat is normally this is how it goes, right? They are regular fat and they find out something about how calorie deficits work, and or they just, something leads them to lose some weight. And they go from regular fat and they start going to the gym, they start lifting, and then they go from regular fat to skinny fat. Maybe they lose some weight. And then along this journey of them losing weight, they realize, oh, fuck, I'm losing weight, but I'm not quite looking how I want to look. You want to look jacked. You want to feel good taking your shirt off at the pool. You want to have abs. You want to fill out your shirts. Right? You want your arms to fill out your shirts. You want to have pecs, not tits. But then you notice as you're losing weight, you're not really doing that. You're not really getting that look. And then you might hit a plateau where you stop losing weight, or you get to a point where you don't want to lose more weight because then you think, oh, well, I don't have enough muscle. Like, I'm just going to look skinny. I'm just going to be scrawny. So how do we avoid this? Well, young Padawan, listen to me here. You can do both. That's how, is you lose weight, you lose fat, and you gain muscle at the same time. This is a tough process. It's called body recomposition, right? And I'm sure you've heard of it, but it's a tough process, both physically and mentally. Mentally, it's tough because you're not going to see a lot of movement from the scale. The scale is not supposed to move very much if you are recomping perfectly. If you are truly skinny fat, where you're not too overweight, you don't have that much to lose, you just kind of have a little fluffy look to you, then the scale's not going to drop very much, right? You're not going to see any of those, I lost 30 pounds in 3 months. You definitely have more weight to lose than you think, but you probably also have a lot less muscle than you think. And so we're going to do both at the same time. The good news for you is you can go into a fairly large calorie deficit and still put on a decent amount of muscle without causing any negative side effects because you have a decent amount of energy on your body. That's where the surplus of energy comes from that you need to build muscle. It's already there. And we've seen, I don't even want to, some people, if anyone still thinks you can't grow muscle in a deficit, they're living in the Stone Ages. We have so much data showing that not only people can grow muscle in a deficit, but trained individuals can grow muscle in a deficit. And there's actually a recent study, my mentor was on it, Alan Aragon, and they found trained lifters actually grew more muscle in a deficit than the ones who were eating at maintenance / a tiny surplus. So that is where we want to be, is in a deficit, right? But when you are sort of in that phase of that skinny fat phase, 9 times out of 10, the problem is you don't know what to do. It's confusion, right? It's, I want to cut because I don't like how I look. I want my abs, and abs is always the thing, right? Everyone always wants the abs, and I don't blame you. That's the whole reason that I got into the gym. I remember when I first walked into a GNC, I was just a wee little 18-year-old. I walked into this GNC looking for ashwagandha because that's the time when everyone said ashwagandha boosts your test. I was like, fuck yeah, more test, more muscle. And I just started going to the gym, and I walked in and bro was like, why are you lifting? And I was like, I want fucking abs. He was like, ashwagandha's not gonna give you abs. And I'm like, all right. And he made me this whole workout plan, and it was really bad. But anyways, that's how it started, right? Is I wanted abs. And so I understand you want abs, but you don't want abs that look like you just got out of Auschwitz. So how do we get that middle ground? Well, small deficit, right? 500-ish calories. And this is going to depend on how much weight you have to lose. So first of all is, we need to be in a deficit because we need to be losing fat. But how big of a deficit do we need? How big is too big? And how do we know if we're losing muscle, if we're gaining muscle? Well, the best way to know if you're losing or gaining muscle is obviously your gym performance, right? So we need to be tracking things. Tracking what gets measured gets managed is the best saying that I have heard of this. So we need to be tracking our body weight, right? Taking progress pictures. That's a big one, especially with this recomp, because again, like I said, the weight is not going to be changing very much. It's mostly going to be visual, right? I had a client who I worked with her for roughly 6 months, and she only lost about 10 pounds on the scale, but the visual difference is night and day. She literally she has resting at, and if you know anything about women's physiology and anatomy, for a woman to have just resting abs, you gotta be pretty damn lean. She went from kind of pudgy, little sort of skinny fat, to having resting abs, and it only was a 10-pound difference on the scale. So that's why it's very important. But it was also like, so that's why we track other things, because the visual difference was crazy. But also the difference in her waist measurement was, I believe, God, it's been a minute since I worked with her. I think it was around 8 or 9 centimeters. No, 6 to 8 centimeters is what she lost off of her waist. And so that's another thing, is she was just gaining so much lean tissue at the same time of losing this fat that the scale was kind of masking the progress. And at the same time, we started taking creatine, so she was obviously holding more water and all kinds of stuff. She was eating more food volume. She was eating less calories, more food volume, right? That's one of the biggest things that I have with a lot of my clients when they start working with me, is they're like, man, I'm not even hungry. I feel like I'm eating more food than I used to. And it's like, you probably are, in terms of actual food volume, in terms of actual food weight, you probably are eating more food, because you can eat a ton of potatoes. I eat over 2.5 pounds of potatoes every day. I guarantee you most people don't eat that much food in a day. They're just eating super highly calorie dense foods. So anyways, tracking data. We want to be tracking progress pictures, waist measurements, the gym performance. Because progress pictures and the waist measurements, that's going to tell us what is happening with our body in terms of the composition. Obviously, the weight is important too. We want to make sure we're not gaining weight. And the gym performance tells us about the muscle. So that's how we track everything. And we need to be tracking these diligently. Obviously, you don't have to do everything every day. Weight, you should track every day, ideally. But pictures and waist measurement, you can do that once a week. Gym performance, obviously, just whenever you're in the gym. So we need to be in a slight deficit. That's the first step. How big of the deficit depends on how fast you want to lose the fat and how much fat you have to lose. More fat you have to lose, the higher the deficit you can go into, the bigger the deficit you can go into without risking losing lean mass. And you can still put on, like I said, a very good chunk of lean mass, especially as a somewhat beginner, and especially as a beginner to training correctly or just training well. There's sort of 2 phases of newbie gains. You have your first round, which is just when you show up to the gym and you'll grow from pretty much doing anything. I was looking over my old workout routine. Holy shit. The fact that I grew any muscle doing that was crazy. I was doing like, I think 8 sets of leg press in a day. Regardless, I was doing some crazy shit. The fact that I was growing any muscle is insane. And on top of that, so that's your first round of newbie gains. Your second round of newbie gains comes when you start training smart, when you stop training like a dumbass and learn how to actually train. Some people will never hit this, and that's why they stay in that intermediate stage forever. That's why you see a lot of dudes at the gym who have been going for a very long time, but they still just look mediocre, because they never really learn how to train correctly. And so my theory here is that they really are never touching their high threshold motor units. So, and those are the ones that can grow twice as much. So those are the fibers, those are your fast twitch fibers. They can grow twice as much. They're basically never touching them. And if they are, they're just barely touching them and then they're atrophying back. So they kind of just maintain how they look. That's my theory on that. But once you learn how to train effectively and train smart, then you get a second round of newbie gains. And most people, when they start working with me, that's what they get, is that second round of newbie gains. And so if you start training smart and you're in a deficit, you're going to be putting on a shit ton of mass. You're going to be losing a shit ton of fat. This is exactly what we want. But you need to be fueling correctly. Just because you're in a deficit doesn't mean that everything you're losing is fat. So we want to be setting up our macros correctly. Well, we know that protein's good, right? We know protein's good. But the question is always how much protein. And recently there's been somewhat of a hot debate about it, because you have the low protein crowd has kind of been peeping up more and more. And I sort of fall in the middle. I think that you should base your protein off of your lean mass, not off of your body weight. Because if you are in this state of being skinny fat, right, you're going to need less protein than your body weight, because you're going to be losing a significant amount of body weight. Probably. You're probably going to lose at least 10 to 15 pounds. Again, this is assuming that you're a male who's around that 200-ish pound range. So I always base protein off of your lean mass. And when you're in a deficit, we know that we know that there's literally a linear relationship between protein intake and lean mass retention in deficits in trained individuals. So that tells us, okay, protein's pretty damn important. But when you're in this case of having quite a bit of fat to lose, you can go a little bit lower. So 2.2 grams per kilogram of fat-free mass is pretty much as low as I will go. And how you find your fat-free mass is you need to know your body fat percentage. If you don't know your body fat percentage, hire a coach, seriously. Because if you try to guess your own body fat percentage, you're probably, I mean, honestly, it's probably going to only do good for you, because you're going to way underestimate your body fat percentage, which is going to way overestimate your fat-free mass, which just means you're going to be eating more protein. But yeah, 2.2 grams per pound or per kilogram of fat-free mass. In freedom units, that is like pretty much like 1 gram per pound of fat-free mass, I think. Yeah. So wait, is it? I don't know. Don't make me do math. Anyways, you want to be eating a decent amount of protein. I like around 1 gram to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight normally. And it just depends on, again, your deficit size. I don't like protein really going over around 30% of your total macro intake, because we do need room for other macros. We need room for your fats, which a lot of people set at sort of an arbitrary range. They set it per pound of body weight, or they just set it at a range. So the per pound of body weight is around 0.3 grams per pound. But again, do we really want to be setting that macro range based off of your current weight? I don't really think so. So normally I do it based off of, I'll look at what that roughly is, but if we're still somewhat above what I think we could be at, I'll go a little bit lower. And personally, I think that the effect that protein has on your hormones is a little bit overstated, in my opinion. And I mean, for women, it literally doesn't even seem to really affect them to go super low fat. This is, 1, supported in the literature, and 2, supported by my anecdotes of just training women and looking at their blood work. I have one client who's on ridiculously low amounts of fat, and her hormones are fine. And I've even put some of my male clients on really low amounts of fat, again, for periods, right? Well, because you're not going to be in this deficit forever. But this recomp phase is going to be pretty long, because that's always the trade-off, is the more aggressive your deficit, the higher the likelihood of losing mass, and at least of not putting it on. But yeah, that's how we're going to set your fats, around 0.3 grams per pound. I think you can go a little bit lower. Normally, the range that I like to set for most dudes is around that 50 to 70 grams of fat per day. You'll be chilling, in all honesty. And you can even probably go a little bit lower than that. I would just watch your bloods. That's a big thing, is get blood work done, please, at least once a year minimum, twice a year, ideally. And because that's really the only way you know if you're healthy, is if you're getting your blood work done. And it can be a little bit expensive. That's why I say once a year minimum. But if you have the money, and if your insurance will cover it, do it twice a year. Ideally, even more than that, if you really care. And especially if you're taking special supplements. But so yeah, drop the fats super low, fill the rest with carbs. And I think it's important to have intro workout carbs, especially in a deficit, because that training is the spark for muscle building. Right. I think training is the spark and protein is the fire. So you can have as much, or protein's the wood, right? So you can have as much fucking wood as you want, but you ain't building shit if you don't light it on fire. And the better the training stimulus, obviously, the bigger the fucking fire is going to be. And I think that's an all right analogy. I don't know. Let me know in the comments how that was. Oh yeah, like and subscribe, by the way. I always forget to plug that. Like and subscribe. Anyways, training. Yeah, we want to keep training fucking pristine. So intra-workout carbs have been shown to decrease our central nervous system fatigue, mainly our perception of effort. And the main hypothesis behind this is just that it essentially tells your brain that more energy, it can go all out, because carbs are not limited. More are on the way. And I mean, if you're really, really, really tight on calories, you could even just swish the carb, because we see good effects from just swishing it and then not even ingesting it. But I would suggest having some intra-workout carbs and electrolytes as well, most likely, right? My go-to is just dextrose, highly branched cyclic dextrin. It's pretty cheap, and Echolyte, Code Cold on both, actually. Yeah, that'll keep the training high. And this is kind of just a yap. It was kind of all over the place, but these are just things that you need to keep in mind as you're transitioning from skinny fat to jacked. Oh my God, that was a terrible fucking whatever. There's probably like 2 people watching at this point. Anyways, peace out. Love y'all. Have a great day. Go get jacked.